Star Wars has killed off hundreds of characters across its films, but not all deaths are created equal. Some reshape the entire galaxy, others barely register. Today, I'm ranking every major character death in the saga, from the ones that meant nothing to the ones that changed everything, starting at the very bottom. Greedo. Let's get the elephant out of the room. Han shot first. In the original 1977 cut, Han Solo blasts Greedo under the table before the Rodian can even pull the trigger. Then George Lucas changed it in the special edition, so Greedo fires first and misses from 3 feet away. That single edit fueled one of the longest fan debates in movie history, all over a character who dies in seconds. Here's the thing. Greedo's death lands dead last in our rankings for one simple reason. It reveals character. It doesn't change the story. That blaster shot tells us exactly who Han Solo is, a survivor, a pragmatist, but the galaxy keeps spinning like nothing happened. Maximum cultural noise, minimum galactic consequence, but if you think starting at the bottom means it's all downhill, the next death proves that even a quick execution can echo across an entire clone army. Jango Fett Mace. Windu didn't just kill Jango Fett, he beheaded him in front of his son. During the Battle of Geonosis in 22 BBY, the galaxy's most feared bounty hunter charged a Jedi Master whose lightsaber style was literally designed to channel dark side energy, and it went exactly how you'd expect. One clean strike, and Jango's helmet went tumbling across the arena floor while young Boba Fett watched the whole thing happen. Now here's a detail most people miss. Jango's severed head wasn't actually inside that helmet when Boba picked it up. If you watch the shadow carefully during the scene, the head falls separately from the helmet, which honestly makes the moment slightly less horrifying for the kid, but only slightly. But here's the thing, Jango's death should have been one of the most consequential in the entire saga. This was the sole genetic template for every single clone trooper in the Republic's army. Millions of soldiers, all carrying his DNA, all preloaded with biochips designed to execute Order 66. Count Dooku handpicked him under Sidious's direct orders. His blueprint was literally the weapon that would destroy the Jedi Order, and yet his actual death barely mattered. By the time his head hit the ground, his legacy was already walking, breathing, and training across the galaxy in millions of identical copies, and his one unaltered clone, Boba, would grow up to become the most feared bounty hunter the galaxy had ever seen. Jango Fett died on Geonosis, but Jango Fett never really went away, which is exactly why his death looks devastating in the moment, but lands surprisingly low on this list. At least Jango left behind a legacy. The next death on our list? Not so lucky. Admiral Ackbar. This one genuinely makes me angry. Admiral Ackbar, one of the most tactically brilliant minds in Rebellion history, dies off screen during the First Order's assault on the Raddus Bridge in The Last Jedi. So quietly that most viewers didn't even notice on their first watch. They thought he was a background character. Let that sink in. This is the man who commanded the entire Rebel fleet at the Battle of Endor, the battle that destroyed the Emperor's second Death Star. He personally coordinated the assault that brought down the Superstar Destroyer Executor. After that, he led the New Republic Defense Fleet to victory over the remnants of the Empire at the Battle of Jakku. His strategic genius literally shaped the course of galactic history. Without Ackbar, the rebellion loses. Period. And his reward? Getting vaporized in a blink and you miss it explosion, while the camera focuses on Leia floating through space. Even the film's editor, Bob Duxey, admitted that Ackbar's death could have used more cinematic weight. When the people who made the movie acknowledge they underserved a character, you know something went wrong. He ranks above the mercenaries because his contributions to the galaxy are undeniable. But his death is the textbook example of how not to send off a legacy character. It's narratively empty, cinematically invisible, and frankly disrespectful to a fan favorite who earned better. But if Ackbar's death was too quiet, the next one has the opposite problem entirely: Mace Windu. Mace Windu wasn't killed by a Sith Lord. He was killed by the Jedi Order's own failures. Here's what happened. Windu arrived at Palpatine's office with 3 other Jedi Masters, Agen Kolar, Saesee Tiin, and Kit Fisto. All 3 were cut down in seconds. Windu alone survived long enough to actually disarm Palpatine and hold a lightsaber to his throat. He won that fight. The Sith threat was seconds away from ending right there, but then Anakin intervened. He severed Windu's hand, and Palpatine seized the opening to blast him out the window with Force lightning. The killing blow came from someone on Windu's own side. Here's where it gets deeper. When Windu declared that Palpatine was too dangerous to be kept alive, those words landed differently for Anakin than anyone else in that room. The Council had doubted him from the very beginning, told him he was too old, that he carried too much fear, too much attachment. A lifetime of institutional distrust and exclusion finally boiled over in one moment. Anakin's betrayal wasn't just about saving Padme, it was about a broken kid who never felt accepted by the people he gave everything to. Windu had the skill to end the entire Sith threat. His death is a tragedy of politics and psychology, not combat. The Order's greatest weapon was turned against itself by its own rigidity. But if you think that's a rough way to go, wait until we talk about someone who lost the will to live entirely. Qui-Gon Jinn. Nobody talks about Qui-Gon Jinn's death as the most important one in the entire saga, but it is. Here's what happened on the surface. He fought Darth Maul in what became one of the most iconic lightsaber duels in franchise history, the Duel of the Fates, and he lost. Maul ran him through, and that was it. But what Qui-Gon did with his dying breath changed everything. He made Obi-Wan promise to train Anakin Skywalker. That single request is the quiet ignition point of the entire Skywalker saga. Anakin's training leads directly to his fall. His fall leads to the rise of the Empire. The Empire destroys the Jedi Order. Every event in the original trilogy traces back to a dying man on the floor of the Theed reactor complex whispering, "Train the boy." The butterfly effect is staggering, but here's where it gets even deeper. Qui-Gon became the first Jedi to discover the path to Force Ghost immortality. He couldn't fully manifest at first, only appearing as a disembodied voice because his training was incomplete. But he shared the technique with Yoda, who passed it to Obi-Wan, who guided Luke. That chain of ghostly mentorship stretches across the entire saga, and it started with him. And here's the kicker. Even in death, Qui-Gon remained completely serene. Total trust in the Force. No fear, no anger, no desperation, just calm acceptance. That composure in his final moments is what separates him from nearly every other Jedi who fell in battle. He didn't just die well, he died like it was part of the plan. If you think that level of quiet influence is impressive, wait until we get to the death that broke an entire galaxy's heart in real time. Count Dooku. Dooku's death should be simple. Anakin cuts his head off, Palpatine smiles, the war moves on. But here's the thing. What looks like a battlefield execution is actually one of the most tragic betrayals in the entire saga, and the films barely scratch the surface of it. On the surface, Anakin decapitates Count Dooku aboard the Invisible Hand, while Palpatine watches from his chair, urging the kill with that calm, fatherly voice. Do it. 2 words. That's all it takes. But Matthew Stover's novelization reveals what the movie never shows you. In his final seconds, Dooku reached out through the Force and perceived what he described as the promise of hell in Anakin's eyes. And in that moment, total clarity. He was never the heir to a new galactic order. He was a pawn, a placeholder. Discarded the instant his usefulness expired. And that's what makes this death sting, because Dooku's original grievance was legitimate. He left the Jedi Order at 60 years old as one of the lost 20, driven out by genuine conviction that a corrupt Senate and a complacent Jedi Council were beyond saving. He was right about the problems. Every single criticism he had was validated by the fall of the Republic, but he chose the worst possible vehicle for acting on those beliefs, and it cost him everything. Despite being the public face of the entire separatist movement across the Clone Wars, his death changes absolutely nothing in Palpatine's plan. He was a warm-up execution, a practice kill designed to push Anakin one step closer to the dark side. A man who thought he was building a civilization discovered in his final breath that he built nothing. But if Dooku's death was a quiet betrayal behind closed doors, the next one was a public spectacle that shattered the Jedi Order in real time. Kylo Ren. Here's the thing about Kylo Ren. His death isn't really a character problem. It's a director problem. In The Force Awakens, he's a volatile, unstable apprentice who murders his own father to prove his commitment to the dark side. In The Last Jedi, Rian Johnson turns him into one of the most genuinely complex villains Star Wars has ever produced. Then The Rise of Skywalker hits, and suddenly he's redeemed because a memory of Han Solo appears to him in a moment that mirrors the bridge scene from Force Awakens, while Leia reaches out through the Force and dies in the effort. That's the turning point for a 3-film arc. His final act is using Force healing to resurrect Rey, sacrificing his own life in the process. And whether that moment lands for you depends entirely on whether you buy that his redemption was earned across 3 movies. made by directors who clearly had different plans for him, because it shows. The seams are visible. The lack of a Force Ghost appearance is what really bothers people. Every other redeemed Skywalker gets that moment. Anakin appears alongside Obi-Wan and Yoda. Ben Solo just vanishes. His body fades, and that's it. No ethereal send-off, no final confirmation that he's truly at peace. The movie just moves on. But here's the detail that really stings. Despite fan campaigns and speculation about potential returns, Lucasfilm has shown zero interest in continuing Ben Solo's story in any meaningful way. They didn't just kill him on screen. They closed the door on every possible future before the audience could even process the loss. But at least Ben got a redemption arc, however messy, because the next death on this list didn't even get that courtesy. Yoda. Every other death on this list involves conflict. A lightsaber through the chest, a betrayal, a last stand, a desperate sacrifice. Not Yoda's. Yoda simply decided he was done. At 900 years old, the greatest Jedi Master who ever lived didn't fall in battle. He wasn't assassinated, he wasn't caught off guard. He lay down in his hut on Dagobah, spoke his final words, and became one with the Force, on his own terms, in his own time. And those final words are worth hearing exactly as he said them. Soon will I rest, yes, forever sleep. Twilight is upon me, and soon night must fall. That is the way of things, the way of the Force. That's it. No anger, no regret, no clinging to life. Compare that to literally every villain in this saga who died, screaming, scheming, or desperately grasping for one more second of power. Yoda is the anti-Palpatine. Where the Emperor cloned himself and crawled back from death because he couldn't accept it, Yoda welcomed it like an old friend. But here's the thing nobody talks about. The timing wasn't random. Yoda died at the exact moment Luke no longer needed a living teacher. His training was complete. His spiritual readiness had reached its conclusion, which is either beautiful Jedi wisdom or the most suspiciously convenient exit in cinematic history, depending on how cynical you are. His death also closed a chapter that had lasted nearly a millennium. Yoda's lifespan stretched from the High Republic through the Clone Wars to the Empire's darkest days. When he vanished, the rigid, tradition-bound old Jedi Order vanished with him, clearing the path for Luke's new philosophy and the living Force approach that Qui-Gon had championed from the very beginning. Yoda didn't just die. He timed his death like a tactical maneuver, executed it with more grace than any battlefield victory, and left behind a galaxy finally ready to move forward without him. But if Yoda mastered the art of letting go, the next death on this list proves what happens when someone refuses to. Padme Amidala. Here's what makes Padme's death so uniquely painful. The medical droids confirmed she was physically healthy. There were zero complications with the birth. Her body was completely capable of survival. She didn't die because something went wrong. She died because everything inside her broke. After discovering that Anakin had massacred the Jedi Order and become Darth Vader, after being force-choked by the man she loved on Mustafar, Padme simply lost the will to live. And that sounds almost absurd on paper, but it's actually one of the most philosophically devastating deaths in the entire saga. Because here's the thing, Anakin turned to the dark side for one reason, to gain the power to save her. Every terrible choice he made, every line he crossed, was driven by the fear of losing Padme, and his fall to the dark side is precisely what killed her. The prophecy he feared was guaranteed by the actions he took to prevent it. That's not just irony, that's a Greek tragedy wearing a Star Wars costume. And there's a detail most casual fans miss entirely. At her funeral on Naboo, Padme's body was deliberately prepared to still appear pregnant. Thousands of mourners lined the streets of Theed, and nobody knew the twins had survived. Even in death, she was used as a shield to protect Luke and Leia's existence from the Empire. She ranks mid-table because honestly, the saga doesn't give her enough. Her death functions almost entirely as a catalyst for Anakin's arc, and as the origin point for the twins who would eventually destroy the Empire. She deserved to be more than what her death did for everyone else. But if you think Padme's story is tragic, wait until you see what the saga did to the man she loved, Princess Leia. Before we even talk about the story, we need to talk about reality. Carrie Fisher passed away in December 2016, and her final scene in The Rise of Skywalker was built entirely from unused footage shot during The Force Awakens. J.J. Abrams didn't recast her. He didn't fully digitize her. He took what Carrie had already given and rebuilt an entire farewell around it. That alone makes this one of the most emotionally loaded deaths in the saga before a single plot point even enters the conversation. But here's what makes it work narratively. Leia's last act was pouring her remaining life force into a force connection with Ben Solo during his battle with Rey. No lightsaber duel, no dramatic confrontation, just a mother reaching across the galaxy to save her son. And depending on your expectations, that's either the most Leia death imaginable or a frustrating anticlimax. I'd argue it's the former. Across 9 films, Leia was the only major character who never stopped believing Ben could come back. Han tried once and died. Luke showed up as a projection to buy time, not to redeem him. Leia poured everything she had left into one final moment of faith, and the fact that it actually worked is the only proof the audience ever gets that she was right all along. Here's where it gets interesting. Her death quietly confirms something the films hint at, but rarely say directly. Leia was Force-sensitive enough to channel her life energy into a galaxy-spanning spiritual act. That puts her final moments in the same tier of Force mastery as Obi-Wan's willing sacrifice on the Death Star and Luke's astral projection on Crait. She wasn't just a general, she was one of the most powerful Force users in the saga, and her greatest act of power looked nothing like a fight. It looked like a mother who refused to give up. Han Solo. Han Solo didn't die like a hero. He died like a father. That's the part nobody was ready for. The original trilogy spent 3 films training audiences to believe Han Solo was untouchable. The guy who shot first, outran the Empire, survived carbonite freezing, and stumbled his way through impossible odds with nothing but luck and instinct. He was the survivor, always. But when Han walks onto that gantry inside Starkiller Base, he's not the guy from the Millennium Falcon anymore. He's an estranged father who lost his son to the dark side, lost his wife in the fallout, and went crawling back to the only life he knew before any of it mattered: smuggling, running. The exact same patterns he had before the rebellion gave him something worth fighting for. And that's what makes his death so devastating. He doesn't confront Kylo Ren with a weapon drawn. He walks out there with his hands open. No blaster, no plan. Just a father begging his son to come home. He genuinely believed that love alone could pull Ben back from the edge. It couldn't. Kylo Ren ignited his lightsaber through his father's chest, and Han Solo fell into the abyss. But here's why this death ranks so high. It doesn't end on that bridge. Han's murder haunts every frame of the sequel trilogy. It breaks Leia. It fuels Rey's grief and her hatred of Kylo Ren. And in The Rise of Skywalker, a vision of Han's forgiveness becomes the final push that brings Ben Solo back to the light. His death created the deepest emotional wound in the sequels, and then it became the cure. Han Solo walked onto that bridge already broken, and somehow that made his death matter more than if he'd gone out in a blaze of glory. Obi-Wan Kenobi. Most characters in Star Wars fight death. Obi-Wan Kenobi walked straight into it. When Vader's blade swings on the Death Star, Obi-Wan doesn't dodge. He doesn't parry. He closes his eyes, raises his lightsaber, and his robes fall empty to the floor. No body, no struggle, just immediate transcendence into the Force. And his final words weren't a desperate plea or a battle cry. They were a promise. If you strike me down, I shall become more powerful than you can possibly imagine. Here's the thing. He meant it. Obi-Wan spends the next several films making good on that exact promise, guiding Luke through Jedi training from beyond death in a way that physical presence never could have permitted. He appears on Hoth to send Luke to Dagobah. He counsels Luke before the final confrontation with Vader. He literally coaches the destruction of the Empire from the afterlife. But people overlook the immediate strategic impact of his sacrifice. His death distracted Vader long enough for the Millennium Falcon to escape the Death Star. That escape directly enabled the rebellion's survival and the eventual destruction of the station at the Battle of Yavin. A single willing death saved the entire rebellion. And beyond the battlefield, Obi-Wan's death established an entirely new concept for the saga. For a Jedi who has fully accepted the Force, death is not a terminus. It's a transition. He wrote the rulebook. Yoda followed it. Luke followed it. Leia followed it. Every significant Force ghost in the franchise exists because Obi-Wan proved it was possible first. He didn't lose that duel. He won the entire war. But if Obi-Wan redefined what death means for a Jedi, the next entry redefined what death means for the saga itself. Emperor Palpatine. Here's the thing about Palpatine. Every other villain on this list dies and stays dead. Palpatine died, came back, and still almost won again. That alone puts him in a category nobody else can touch. His death in Return of the Jedi was supposed to be the ending. Vader grabs his master, hurls him into the Death Star's reactor shaft, and the Chosen One prophecy is fulfilled. The Sith are destroyed. Balance is restored. For decades, that was the definitive conclusion to the entire Star Wars saga. But then, The Rise of Skywalker revealed that Palpatine had spent years building clone bodies on Exegol as a contingency plan. He literally cheated death, and whether you love that twist or hate it, and plenty of fans fall on both sides, it fundamentally forces you to reinterpret what Vader's sacrifice actually meant. Was it the triumphant end of the Sith, or just a temporary setback? Here's where it gets fascinating. The novelization of The Rise of Skywalker gives us Palpatine's actual internal perspective on that moment. He viewed Anakin's redemptive act as completely pointless. In his mind, Vader threw away his life for nothing, because the Sith endured beyond any single body. Anakin's sacrifice was a sentimental gesture that accomplished zero permanent change. And that arrogance? That's exactly what killed him the second time. Palpatine genuinely could not comprehend that Anakin had achieved something real, that the temporary balance Anakin created mattered, that love and sacrifice have weight even when they don't last forever. So when Rey turned his own power against him, using the collective strength of every Jedi who came before, he never saw it coming. Because he never understood what he was actually fighting. Palpatine ranks near the very top, because his influence is the spine of the entire 9-film saga. He manipulated events from The Phantom Menace through The Rise of Skywalker, survived his own death, and still required 2 generations of Skywalkers plus his own granddaughter to finally stop him permanently. Nobody else demanded that much to put down. Luke Skywalker. Luke Skywalker didn't die fighting, he died meditating, and that's exactly why his death is one of the most powerful in the entire saga. Here's what actually happened on Crait. Luke appears on the battlefield, faces down the entire First Order, and duels Kylo Ren one-on-one. Every blaster bolt misses. Every lightsaber strike passes through him, because Luke was never there. His physical body was sitting cross-legged on a rock on Ahch-To, projecting his consciousness across the entire galaxy to create a manifestation so convincing that Kylo Ren, the Resistance, and most of the audience genuinely believed he had teleported. The projection was never designed to win. It was designed to stall, and it worked perfectly. The Resistance escaped through the back of the cave, Kylo Ren was left swinging at nothing, and Luke simply smiled and faded into the Force. Mission complete. But here's where people get this death wrong. The years Luke spent on that island weren't depression. They weren't cowardice. They were preparation. Think about the progression of Jedi deaths across the saga. Obi-Wan allowed himself to be struck down and became a Force ghost. Qui-Gon discovered the ghost technique and taught it to Yoda. Luke took it further than any of them. He projected a physical seeming form across light years while still alive, a feat so far beyond established Jedi ability that it literally has no precedent in the canon. That kind of mastery doesn't happen overnight. It requires spiritual development that would be impossible in a war zone or a training temple. Luke's isolation was the most ambitious Jedi training arc in the entire saga, and nobody recognized it because it looked like failure from the outside. Each generation of Jedi pushed the boundary of what the Force permits. Obi-Wan proved you could survive death. Qui-Gon proved you could teach others to do the same. Luke proved you could transcend death while still using the Force to physically alter events galaxies away. That's not a broken old man on an island. That's the most powerful Jedi who ever lived, choosing the exact moment and method of his sacrifice. And still, somehow, this death gets underrated, but not nearly as underrated as the one that ties this entire saga together. Darth Vader. For nearly 23 years, Anakin Skywalker was buried alive, not in a grave, in armor, in rage, in servitude to the Emperor who had deceived him into destroying everything he ever loved, his wife, his friends, his entire order. Every breath through that mask was a reminder of what he'd lost and what he'd become, and the entire saga was built around one question. Was the Chosen One still in there? Luke's answer is the most radical act in all of Star Wars. He doesn't defeat Vader with a stronger lightsaber technique. He doesn't outmaneuver the Emperor with some brilliant strategy. He throws his weapon away. He refuses to fight, refuses to flee, and refuses to stop believing that his father is still good. That's it. That's how he wins. Not through superior force power, but through unconditional love that Vader literally cannot destroy, no matter how hard he tries. And when Vader finally turns, when he grabs the Emperor and hurls him into the reactor shaft, he doesn't just save his son, he fulfills the prophecy. The balance that Qui-Gon's death set in motion. The balance Padme died hoping for. The balance Obi-Wan surrendered his life to protect the possibility of. It arrives in a single moment that costs Vader everything he has left. The galaxy's last two Sith Lords are destroyed simultaneously, and Anakin Skywalker dies free. But here's the detail that makes this the greatest character death in the entire saga. When the Force ghosts appear at the end of Return of the Jedi, Anakin is standing alongside Obi-Wan and Yoda. Not Vader, Anakin. The Force itself recognized his transformation. His redemption wasn't just emotional, it was spiritually complete. The galaxy didn't just forgive him. The Force confirmed he was restored. That's not the end of the story. That's the proof that the story's central argument about darkness, light, and the space between them was correct all along. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.